Good afternoon. My name is Regina Hopkins. I'm with the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. I'm here with two people from the law firm of Buckley-Sandler, Elizabeth McGinn and Jim Shreve, and they are going to be giving a presentation on W-2 fraud and the potential risk for nonprofits. What is interesting is that just last week, the IRS sent out an urgent alert to all as part of their newsletter saying that cyber thieves are specifically targeting nonprofits now with a lot of their scams about cyber theft. And so I couldn't have been more timely than the fact that the IRS just announced that as an area of concern for them. So with that, we'll turn it over. Just a couple of things. There is a question box. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, please type them in and I will pass them along to either Jim or Elizabeth. And the second is that the PowerPoint presentation, you will see it in the handouts box of the interface. You can download that and follow along and make notes if you'd like. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, who will start. And thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Jim, for taking the time to make this presentation. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Regina. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, W-2 Fraud, a Privacy Risk for Employees and Nonprofits. My name is Beth Megan, and I'm a partner at Buckley-Sandler and co-head of the firm's Privacy, Cyber, and Data Security practice. Also participating today, as Regina mentioned, in this webinar is my colleague, Jim Shreve. Jim is counsel with Buckley-Sandler, where his practice focuses on privacy, data security, and cyber risk issues. He is an advisor to companies addressing complex issues involving confidential information and the systems where such information is stored and transmitted. He is a thought leader in cybersecurity and privacy law and navigates pressing business concerns and applies the law to new and evolving technology. Jim has participated in numerous presentations on topics ranging from addressing security breaches, mobile payment systems, vendor oversight, and drone privacy. Given, and Regina mentioned what the IRS has issued, but given that it's tax season and the amount of W-2 fraud that Jim and I saw companies subjected to last year, we thought it'd be a really great idea to have this webinar. Today we're going to be covering a bunch of different topics. First, what is W-2 fraud and what is considered business email compromise, which Jim and I will refer to as BEC. We will be discussing some recent incidences and what you should be looking out for, some current trends in the incidences, insurance to protect against these types of attacks, and practical steps to mitigate risks. I'd like to turn it over now to Jim. Jim?
Well, thanks, Beth. And thanks to the DC Bar for having me and for allowing me to talk about the subject. I do cybersecurity work, and my wife actually works in nonprofits and has for several years, so I'm used to dealing with these kind of issues and know some of the specific constraints and issues that can come up for nonprofits in the security space. We talk about W-2 fraud. It can come in a variety of forms, but specifically there's a lot of sensitive information in someone's W-2 that can be used by criminals for various purposes. Here we're primarily talking about the use of W-2 information by a fraudster to falsely file a tax return on behalf of someone without their knowledge, and then to collect the refund that that person would be due, and to do it quickly, to do it before the person can file their own return. And so the person who is the subject of the fraud might not find out about it until they actually try and file their taxes and receive a message that, no, your return has already been filed. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. BEC, as Beth mentioned, a business email compromise, it also has many forms it can come through. It can be through a true compromise of someone's credentials, so that someone has inadvertently given their credentials to someone else, or it's been, there's been a phishing attack to trick someone into giving over their username and login or something like that. I know nonprofits can be particularly vulnerable to lost credentials because quite often there will be accounts that will be shared, and so multiple people will be using the same username and password on accounts. So that can be particularly of concern. Business email compromise can come from spoofing. So someone sends an email that purports to be from someone else, and it looks kind of right, but they didn't actually steal the credentials. They just made it look like it came from some high-ranking official in the organization, because that's typically who the sender of these emails is. Or as I mentioned, you can have a phishing email. You can have somebody, could, even just a blatant attempt without trying to really impersonate, can just try and send an email to someone they think would be a good target for obtaining information. They send the email, and see if they get someone to respond back on it. The intent of a business email compromise can vary quite a bit as well. Here we're primarily looking at the sending of an email, usually from somebody high-ranking in the organization, that requests copies of company W-2s. It can also be used, and we'll mention a little bit in a bit, for wire fraud. So that someone sends an email that says, okay, we have a contract with somebody now. Could you please send, wire these funds to this bank account? And they'll give the information. So there's a variety of ways that these all can happen, but we're going to focus in on sort of one way that we're usually seeing with this that involves use of W-2 fraud. I'll pass it back to Beth.
Thanks, Jim. Unfortunately, the BEC scam continues to grow, evolve, and target businesses of all sizes, including nonprofits. The scam has been reported by victims in all 50 states and in 100 countries. Reports indicate that fraudulent transfers have been sent to over 79 countries, with the majority going to banks located in China and Hong Kong. The FBI has reported $3.1 billion in losses since January 2015, and it's likely the number is higher since there are numerous incidences that go unreported. Unfortunately, there could be also uninsured losses too. During the FTC's Tax Identity Theft Awareness Week, and that was in February, the FTC reported that in 2016, 34% of the identity theft complaints to the FTC concerned taxes, employment, or wages, falling from 45% in 2015. The FTC also reported that the total identity theft complaints to the FTC was also down, dropping to roughly 400,000 in 2016 from 490,000 in 2015. Now, while the numbers have dropped a bit, from 2015, the numbers are still very high and remain a very large concern for businesses who fall victim to this and also law enforcement. What the FTC has noticed recently is IRS imposters. They saw a lot of scam callers who call saying that they're the IRS or law enforcement and that they're going to arrest or fine you unless you immediately pay them for taxes you supposedly owe, and paying by wire fraud. And Jim touched upon this, and we'll talk more about that. The FTC received roughly 118,000 complaints about IRS imposters in 2016, and this was up 22% from 2015 and 125%, believe it or not, from 2014. Today, this morning actually, the FTC released an annual summary of consumer complaints, and now imposter scams are the second most common consumer complaints. The first is debt collection. The third is identity theft. So these imposter scams have bumped identity theft to 3. Most of these scams, you're seeing the states that really get targeted are Florida, Georgia, Michigan, and Delaware. Those are the states that seem to have a lot of that. That doesn't mean that other states aren't victims to this. One interesting imposter scam happened last fall, and it was in the press, and it's been in recently, the police raided a series of call centers in India. And the callers were claiming to be officials with the IRS or immigration, and we present those that answer the phone with the ultimatum, as I mentioned, like pay us or we'll fine you, arrest you, or deport you. The DOJ filed an indictment, and over 60 people were charged. And this particular network was responsible for over 1.8 million calls to U.S. taxpayers and defrauding over 15,000 victims out of $300 million. And about 50,000 individuals suffered ID theft. Unfortunately, the authorities in India were only able to make arrests at this call center. There were numerous others, and by the time they got there, they had just, completely cleaned out the buildings. The whistleblowers, the two that had, highlighted this to authorities, and both Indian and also U.S., said within weeks of this closing, there were other pop-up call centers that were targeting Americans with different types of scams. So the IRS, the FTC, DOJ, FBI are very well aware of what's going on with this. Already in 2017, and it's not even, we haven't even finished our first week in March, there have been numerous BEC data breaches, much higher at this time this year than last year. Roughly 44 organizations have disclosed BEC-related data breaches, each one resulting in compromised W-2 data. These attacks have affected at least 65,000 taxpayers. That's gone up from 45,000 just a week or two ago. The confirmed victims include school systems, nonprofits, that's why we're talking today, software firms, sports team, utility companies, a lot of hospital employees and county employees, finance and manufacturing, and various energy companies. In 2016, the criminals behind these attacks mostly focused on payroll and tax records, and we're seeing this again this year, but they are following up, as we've touched on already, wire fraud. So many companies have lost both employees' W-2s and thousands of dollars due to the wire transfers. Next page, please. So as discussed, the BEC attacks are essentially phishing scams. And since, the criminals have a targeted, particular target, they are very, very effective in exploiting the trust relationships within a business environment. In the majority of the reported cases from last year and this year, we are seeing attackers forge an email pretending to be the victim's organization CEO or CFO or another high-level manager. The message is usually sent to someone in human resources or payroll, and the attackers clearly identify the type of data they are after. We have seen situations where an outside third party, like an accountant or payroll, sends an email to HR requesting PII or W-2 information. We've also seen emails from a lawyer saying that they need information because they're handling confidential or time-sensitive matters. And these types, the confidential, time-sensitive, can occur at the end of the business day or work week, and can be timed to coincide with the close of business for some international financial institutions. Some examples we're seeing, I will read those to you. Kindly send me the individual 2016 W-2 and earnings summaries of all W-2 of our company staff for a quick review. Can you send me the updated list of employees with full details, name, social security number, date of birth, home address, and salary? I want you to send me the list of all employees and their W-2s for 2016. I need them in PDF file type, and you can send it as an attachment. Kindly please list and email them to me ASAP. Now, would any of those requests sound like your CEO or CFO? Would anyone in admin, request these records using this particular wording? They may sound odd, reading them aloud, but they're working. Many cyber criminals have used customized email templates because they've gotten into the system and compromised the company accounts to pull off these types of scams and the wording. The attackers are savvy enough to know how to word their message to match the style of the person it's supposed to be because they're in the system. For instance, if your CEO is, Andrew, or CFO is William, but they go by Andy or Bill, they're able to get in and craft that. So an employee, really thinks it's the actual person. Also, the employees that are being targeted, are, typically, they are not the CEO or the CFO. They are people that report to these individuals, and they want to please their requester. So they fall, prey to this, given how the emails are worded, and also wanting to make sure, and it's part of their job, they may have, they have access to this information. So that's what's happening. It's many times it's a second email that the individuals get that alerts them like, hey, that's odd. And then by that time, as Jim and I have worked very closely with the IRS and FBI, they've told us it's within hours where the damage has been done. So by the time they get the second email, it could be a few days, a week, and it may be too late. Unfortunately, these types of attacks can't be fixed with a single tool or security product. Successful attacks are the result of humans just being humans. They're a result of poor data control policies, lack of training, and lack of communication. And we're going to talk later on how we can help guide through that so that you all are not a victim to this. I'd like now turn, Jim, to the current trends.
Thank you, Beth. Beth mentioned, these trends are continuing from past years. They're increasing on the whole, and they're also morphing a bit. That cyber criminals will seek out the lowest hanging fruit. And so if they've been trying this kind of thing the past few years at larger organizations, maybe they'll decide, okay, we're going to try smaller organizations. And whereas on the variant of DEC on wire fraud, it might make more sense to go after an entity with large sums of money in the bank accounts. With W-2 fraud, the target really is to find as many employees who are going to receive refunds on their income taxes as possible. And so a smaller organization might work just as well for that. And so if you're finding large awareness at the big organizations, move on to somewhere else, go after someone. And so as Beth mentioned, we're seeing this year increasingly nonprofits, small businesses, school systems being targeted. All this said, the basic patterns to the attack remain the same. It still typically involves an email that purports to be from the CEO or the president of the organization, the managing director, to someone who handles HR for the company. And it can be, I don't want to say that it's exclusively internal, but sometimes they will send it to someone who does externally takes care of HR. Requesting the W-2s or W-2 type information that would enable them to then file tax returns from someone. Typically, this is happening most of the attacks are happening soon after January 30th. And so, now we're halfway through this tax season. So I would say that probably a majority of these attacks that have happened or that are going to happen have happened already, but they still could happen. Criminals are still going to go out there and try and do this, and they do it early because they have to file before the actual individual files. And so the sooner they can do that, the better their chances. So what that means is it's definitely worth going back in your organization, looking back, saying, okay, did we see anything suspicious? Since, go back since the beginning of the year, but certainly since the end of January when the W-2s had to go out, that would indicate that we might have had this kind of thing. Maybe we didn't recognize it at the time, but now looking back, this may have been what it was. So I think that's very worthwhile to consider. And then as I mentioned, increasingly we're seeing criminals looking for that low-hanging fruit. If they know an organization is vulnerable to this kind of thing, they'll go right back to the well. And so an example of this might be They tried the W-2 fraud, and it's successful. They're able to obtain that information, and so they followed up with an email request, from the head of the organization to someone in finance, saying, okay, now can you please send this wire transfer to this bank account as quickly as possible. And maybe they're even savvy enough that knowing organizations are reeling from this kind of W-2 fraud, they might say, okay, we have to pay for a new security system because obviously we have a problem. And then that is a ruse to try and get someone to wire funds to them so that they can take advantage of the organization that way as well.
Jim, can I interrupt this? Just to tell us an anecdote. Yeah, this is Regina Hopkins from the Pro Bono Center. I had a colleague, a friend of mine, who works for a nonprofit in D.C., and she went out to lunch one day, and when she came back like an hour later, one of the people in finance said, "Oh, we're just about to send out that wire transfer you asked for." And she said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "Well, we got an email telling us to send out this wire transfer to an organization that they give grants to, and it was, I think, for $10,000." And she said, "I never sent it." So they caught it just in time because they were just about to send it out. And what they found out was one of their employees' email had been hacked, and they probably had been looking at their emails back and forth for a little, like maybe a week or two, and they figured out how to do this. As you said, they mimicked them. And so they sent this email saying to send out the wire transfer. And if she had been at lunch 10 minutes longer, they would have lost their $10,000. So it does, and they're not a big nonprofit. They weren't a big nonprofit. So I could just say from personal experience that, this has been going on, and they have been targeting nonprofits particularly.
Absolutely. That's great. Great knowledge there. I appreciate that. And I think as well with nonprofits, it points out two things. One is that the importance of communication, because this was caught because of good communication that went out of band. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. But also with nonprofits, it's oftentimes a small office, and if it's not unheard of for a nonprofit to be in a shared space, several other organizations, and everybody leaves for lunch, at the same time, and so there's no one there, and if people don't lock down their computer, and they have their email up, someone could easily just walk over, send an email, purports to be from that person that transmits this request, and there they didn't even have to steal the credentials, it was just left open to them. So, certainly some things there to think about. I appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about insurance, and I know that this is an area where a lot of for-profit companies are paying cyber insurance, but I think increasingly even nonprofits are considering it just because of the risks that they face. And if you have cyber insurance policies, or if you've looked into it, one of the things you know about them is that this is still a forming market, that it's very difficult to make an apples-to-apples comparison between two different policies that two different insurance companies offer. They offer, one offers A, B, C, the other offers X, Y, Z, and they come at it in a completely different way. And so it can be difficult to know if something is covered or not. As I said, it's still forming. We're still getting case law that would help us to interpret these kind of policies. But there have been a few cases involving business email compromise. All of these involving wire fraud, not the W-2 variant, but still informative in the W-2 space that goes to whether or not you could actually make a claim under these policies. The first one I'm going to talk about is AmeriForge, which is a Texas manufacturer that wired $480,000 to a bank in China based on an email that was purportedly from the CEO to the accounting director. The original funds were wired and then followed up by a request to send $18 million to that account. The accounting director sent the first payment but became suspicious of the second one and then notified others in the company. AmeriForge filed a claim against its cyber policy for the lost $480,000 wire transfer. The policy covered the forgery of a financial instrument, which the insurer said didn't occur in this case because you had a legitimate financial instrument that someone was just tricked into sending, so that it wasn't actually forged in this case. And so this is a case that's still pending in a court in Texas. Apache Corporation, scammers spoofed the email of a service provider to Apache to request an update of the service provider's bank account information. Apache changed the payment account information of their service provider and then sent about $7 million to the scammer's account that it was changed to before the fraud was detected. Apache filed an insurance claim with GAIC, who rejected the claim as not being computer fraud, which computer fraud being what was covered under the policy. Apache sued and was granted a summary judgment in a district court. On appeal, though, the Fifth Circuit examined a line in the policy that said GAIC would pay the loss of money, quote, resulting from the use of any computer to fraudulently cause a transfer. The Fifth Circuit overturned the lower court, stating that the email correspondence was not computer use to trigger the transfer. That was just the communications mechanism. The actual transfers were triggered by legitimate invoices that were sent by the service provider. So that's a case where the insured company lost. In Principal Solutions, the controller at an IT staffing company received a spoofed email that appeared to be from the CEO with instructions to send over $1.5 million the same day and contact a specified, quote, attorney for instructions or the transfer. And the attorney was a fraudulent person as well. The controller contacted the alleged attorney and received the wire instructions. The fake attorney then also called the controller back saying that the funds transfer, which related to a secret company acquisition, had been approved by the CEO, and then there was the need for the wire transfer to be sent very quickly. The funds were wired, and then the fraud was discovered the next day, but the company couldn't recover the funds. The insurer denied coverage under a commercial crime policy, saying that the loss did not result directly from a fraudulent instruction, and that other events between the spoofed email and the transfer had intervened. The federal district court here in Georgia said that the policy was ambiguous on intervening events and that the insurer's interpretation would render the funds transfer fraud coverage almost pointless. So here the judgment they gave summary judgment to the insured company. All these cases hinge on specific language of the policy and will be very fact sensitive. For BEC cases, certainly read closely the language on intervening events in your policy and look at that if you're considering a policy, because that can be very important in these kind of cases as you move forward. Thinking about a few other issues, sorry, is this, Beth, is this you or is this, I'm sorry. No, that's me, sorry.
No, sorry, Jim, yes.
Sorry. First thing, is it a security breach? No, thank you. Is it a security breach? And in not all cases will it be. Frequently when you have a W-2 incident, it's going to be a security breach because it involves an individual's name and social security number. And so when you have those elements, those are almost always going to be, or always be, personal information under state breach notice laws. And it's important to note that the applicable law is going to be the law of the person to whom the data relates. So if you're in DC you experience a W-2 incident, You're going to need to consider not only DC law, but quite likely Maryland law, Virginia law, possibly some other states as well, depending on where the employees reside. And so that may require you then to not only notify the employees, which probably we're going to do anyway, but to possibly notify other agencies, state agencies like the attorneys general or other regulatory agencies. When an incident happens, when there's been a security breach, regulators or AGs quite often will come in and say, this happened, let's see your incident response, let's see your security program and your incident response program. That's very common, particularly if you have an incident that involves individuals in Massachusetts or in Indiana, but any AG can do it. Maryland has been a pretty aggressive AG on security breaches as well. And then you also have to consider contractual issues. If the incident in some way involves another entity, if you're maintaining information on behalf of someone else, or if you have a service provider, you need to look at the contracts you have with that entity, because those contracts may require you or may require the other entity to go beyond what their legal requirements are. Things to think about are the involvement in an investigation. So we discovered this happened, but we now, under our contract with this other entity, we have to let them know, and we have to bring them into the investigation. And they may have some say on how the investigation is conducted, or on any communications that are sent out to the individuals that are involved, to AGs, or to the media, if you need to tell the media about an incident. And then you also need to consider the reputational risk. If this gets out that an incident happened, it could have an impact on the reputation of the organization. You're telling people you want to give you money. You may have to convince them that we've taken care of our security, that we're adequately securing information on donors and on employees as well. And then you think about employee relations. This can be, if poorly handled, these incidents can be very difficult on employee relations. And employees can then sometimes not trust the organization to do what's right or to secure their information. So think about these in advance, and then also think about these issues as you're dealing with the incident itself. When you're addressing an incident, one thing to think is that you should have an incident response plan in place before you deal with any of these kind of things. And it's best to deal with a W-2 incident under that plan. So ideally, then you would alert an incident response team, at a nonprofit. That might be a small group, and it often may involve people who are outside the organization. Make sure you're involving everybody who's necessary to dealing with an incident, to investigating what happened, and to addressing it, but no more. You can't involve everybody in the organization in that process. And so you have to think about all the internal and external resources you're going to have in place in advance. You think about your legal counsel. That it's quite common for nonprofits to rely mostly on outside legal. If you bring in your attorneys, they may have experience in dealing with these incidents and may be able to protect some of the decision making that goes into this addressing an incident under the attorney-client privilege, which can be very important. See what you can do immediately. Can you recall the message that the W-2s went out with? Can you recall the wire transfer that went out? See if there's something you can do right away. Quite often there's not, but it's certainly worth seeing if you can. And then also, don't assume that if you discovered an incident or a possible incident that was the first one. It may be that you discovered number 3 in the line or number 5 in the line, and this is just the first one that somebody alerted someone to. So go back and look as you're addressing this current incident to see if there have been earlier ones as well. Beth, you have some thoughts on the IRS.
Right. It's really important then, when you're subjected to this, to contact the IRS and law enforcement. As Jim mentioned, your incident response team, and I'll go into a little bit more of that later, your plan and everything, but you should have these individuals, these organizations, at your fingertips, their phone numbers. If possible, develop relationships within the FBI, IRS, Secret Service, so you have a direct person to call. In-house counsel, external counsel, most likely will have those. They will be your best friend. They want to help the company. They want to help the victims. So it's really important to develop those relationships beforehand if you can. As Jim touched upon, getting in-house and external counsel involved to maintain privilege, you really want to, when you talk to these individuals, you want to make sure you're organized and you have as many facts as you can and your message ready. And you want to protect privilege. That's not saying hiding anything. It's just during these incidences there may be more things that you uncover, and you may have follow-up conversations. Most likely you will with these organizations, but involving legal is really, really important in the beginning to be able to craft the plan, and talk to these individuals, and get the help that you all may need. Jim?
Oh, thanks, Beth. Thanks, Beth. I mentioned about insurance. If you have insurance, it's important to let them know if you have an incident on which you might file a claim, because they may have demands or requirements under the policy that they be involved in a specific way relative to the investigation or notices, or may have a say in what outside resources you use. If they're going to be paying for them, they may say you can only use these particular resources. Watch for follow-up incidents. Sometimes I have this blood in the water that if it gets to be known, if a particular cyber criminal is successful with an entity, they will go back to that entity until they're no longer successful. They will also sell. They will monetize anything they have, and so the knowledge that they have that a particular organization can be vulnerable is something that they will sell out on the dark web. Let it be known that a particular organization can be gotten, and it'll get out in the media. And so if it gets out in the media, look for copycats, because that kind of thing will happen. Then consider about breach notifications.
Jim, if you don't mind.
Sure.
For the follow-up instance, Jim and I have seen after, someone who has been victim to the W-2 fraud, like Jim mentioned, they will get in and continue to just hit the cavity and try to get more and more. And then sometimes the information we've seen, they will set up, like Jim mentioned, the dark web, they will set up websites with the individuals, the senior people, basically asking, talking about the company, but then asking for investment, or, donate money, or, we can help you, pay us this amount of money. So you really want to be diligent and check to see, work with your IT people to see what else they could be doing, and also just scan to see if a website has been, done. And we'll tell you if you see these, who to contact, because, IRS is working with FBI and everyone, with these schemes, and they know the players out there and what's happening to companies. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No, great points. Absolutely, I agree. Talking about breach notifications, it's just something you want to keep in mind during the entire process. And it's something you're going to have to do investigations around as part of addressing the incident. But usually this is not one of the first things that you're going to need to do legally. As a general rule, you want to contain the incident first, figure out what happened, make sure that you close the gap, and then worry about notifying people. That said, there are time frames for notice under various state breach notice laws, that can be as short as 30 days from discovery of the incident. If you have some people who are involved in Florida, there can be requirements to notify state AGs that are as short as 14 days after the incident. And if you happen to have information personal information involved that doesn't belong to you, and you have to notify the owner of that information, those timeframes can be as short as 24 hours. So that's all things to keep in mind, but in general, the notifications are going to come after you at least started to remediate an incident. And then finally, apply what you've learned, which is learn from your own incidents. If you have something, make sure it doesn't happen again. If an AG contacts you, that's going to be one of the first things they're going to ask about is, after they say, what happened, how many people in my state were involved, then they're going to say, and what have you done to make sure it doesn't happen again? And so think about that for your own incidents as well as ones that you hear about in the news. That it can be a great training exercise to think about if something happened at a similar company, similar organization to yours. Think about, if that happened to us, how would we have dealt with it? Because you may see that same kind of incident yourself coming before too long. And then on to a few practical steps. Beth, do you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, Jimmy, nice that you mentioned training. It's so important to educate your employees about safe online practices. There is a huge return on investment for security awareness training. A few years ago, PwC calculated that the return on investment for security awareness training being at $500,000. Because, and I mentioned this, these W-2, breaches, most data breaches involve human error. So training can reduce the risk of having these breaches. The Poneman Institute, Jim, works very closely with us. They issued a study. They do, I believe it's every year, but last year's study came out saying that the average cost of a breach is more than $158 per record, and that the average cost can be up to $4 million. So breaches are really expensive, as you all are aware. Businesses with an increased awareness, training, and understanding of the BEC scams are more likely to recognize them, that they've been targeted, and therefore are likely to avoid falling victim to and paying the wire transfers. Companies that have robust internal prevention techniques at all levels, and particularly the frontline employees who we've mentioned may be the recipients of the initial attempt, have proven very successful in recognizing and deflecting BEC attempts. Some things to consider in training: inform employees as to the various types of phishing emails. Emails posting as an IRS e-services. We've worked with the IRS. When I did another presentation with someone that we work closely, he said, those are not from the IRS. They typically do not send you emails. The government are saying, we want money from you. So educate your employees on those types. Emails posting as new clients you've never worked with, or as we mentioned, like senior management. Instruct your employees on the use of strong passwords. Jim had mentioned smaller companies, it's really important. You go to lunch, and if things are not locked in your computer, or if you don't have policies about strong passwords or encryption, you can be more susceptible to a breach. The use of email, there should be training on that, or use of portable devices, or your own, your iPhones, and what can be done. Always instruct employees not to click on links or download attachments from individuals they're not familiar with. Instruct employees to be suspicious for requests for secrecy. I mentioned that, what we've seen with lawyers, or urgent, anything urgent. Be careful what is posted on social media and company websites, especially job duties, descriptions, and out-of-office details. Regina mentioned someone that she knew about, they were out to lunch, but we've seen situations where the hackers have gotten in, they know the CEO's calendar, they know where they're going to be in the country or, the state, and, that's where they will reach out to other employees requesting money or what have you. Be on the lookout for sudden changes in business practices. For example, if a current business contact suddenly asks to be contacted by personal email address, or they say change jobs, and it just seems unusual. Be really careful with that. Pick up the phone and ask, because that's another way they can get in. So that's something, and we've mentioned, just communication is so key. Pick up the phone. If they don't typically get emails from certain folks, they should know to pick up the phone to talk to their supervisor or walk down the hall. Jim had mentioned if there's a breach, regulators will ask for certain policies, procedures, training. Training is a theme in regulator exams. They ask about that, or investigations or enforcement actions. Consent orders have requested privacy and security awareness training for employees and for vendors. They've asked for written information security programs and what the company's data breach response plan is. So it's so important to have these in place before something happens. Also consider creating an internal policy on the distribution of W-2 information and wire transfers. It could be a very short policy, but consider doing that in light of the activity that we're seeing and will continue, unfortunately, to be seen by these hackers. Incident response program. This is another, as I mentioned, Jim, it's really important to have this in place before. This topic could be its own webinar, but I just wanted to mention, a few tips. Jim mentioned incident response team, really important to have one. The team will analyze reports of security breaches and threat intelligence in order to develop the company's response strategy. There's so many different types of teams, the internal one, and also external, the internal being in-house, your CISO, HR, someone from senior management. External teams, besides, having contact of, the individuals, the Secret Service, FBI, also think of having, knowing companies that could help you, forensic, call centers if you need that, PR, and, your outside counsel, and have their numbers readily accessible, even cell phone numbers, because what we've seen, most breaches will happen late night or on a weekend, and once you have one, you really want to contain it. You need to contain it as quickly as possible. Another tip, conduct an incident threat analysis and determine how your company will define a security incident. Is it an attempted attack, or does the attack need to be successful to warrant a response? Once defined, conduct an analysis by discovering and documenting the threats, risks, and any failures that impact your security, your company's security measures. Create quick response guidelines for different scenarios. And when using your threat analysis, these quick response guides for scenarios that you think will occur, make these available to your response team, and this will allow you to act very quickly, on the incidents that threaten your organization. Again, outline a plan for external notification. We've talked about that. When you have to notify state AGs, but also, the people that will be helping you investigate, these types of situations. Communicate your plan to employees. Employees should be aware of the plan and have access to it. They should understand their role if they are the ones that get the email, or other types of breaches too. They need to know who to call, what to do, and not wait. If it happens on a Friday at 5, not wait till Monday. Just immediately, act, and who they need to talk to. Just like any other process, incident response plans require practice and training. Consider running tabletop exercises. That will help you fine-tune your plan to see if there's any gaps or areas of improvement. Everyone should do a trial run, and it's really, really helpful if you do have an actual incident. And then Jim had mentioned, learn from your past mistakes and other things that have happened. Meet with all the parties if you do have a situation that handled the incident, to discuss what they think they went well, what you could improve upon, because that's going to be really, really helpful in the long run. Jim, do you want to talk about security programs?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. That's all very good information. I think quite often at nonprofits, the IT functions and information security functions quite frequently are entirely outsourced. It might be handled, by an external vendor that comes in, once a week, once a month, whatever, to deal with particular problems, or that you may pay, on a per-use basis for. But I think it's worth, given that you may have limited time with some of your IT and information security people, to ask them about what controls they have put in place for your organization to deal with them. I mean, there's for one thing, you may hear about DLP, data loss prevention software, which is, if you're not familiar with it, is software that looks for structured types of personal information, the classic one being a social security number. And so it will monitor and try and find every time that a 9-digit number is leaving the information system. And it'll try and stop that. It'll give you either an alert or it may stop it from going out. The reason that a lot of times in these W-2 incidents, a PDF is requested is specifically because a lot of DLP systems are not set up to read the data that is in a PDF. It looks at the PDF and just sees it as a picture. It doesn't have OCR, which allows it to read the characters in the PDF, and so it won't detect when that social security number that's on the W-2 form goes out. So it's worth asking your vendor, or certainly your in-house people as well, but particularly where you have a vendor and you don't see them often, ask them how your system deals with that, and if something went out in a PDF, if it would be detected. And then also have structural controls. As Beth mentioned, having a process in place. Consider for any W-2 form, for any wire transfer, that there has to be a dual approval process. 2 people in the organization have to approve, if there's going to be a wire transfer, and there has to be some communication that goes out of band, which is one of the next things I'm going to talk about here, which the primary tool you have here isn't so much a technology one, but a communications tool. Is as was mentioned in the example before, that what stopped the incident was people communicating and confirming. And so in a small nonprofit environment, you might have everybody in one or just a couple of rooms. It's as simple as just walking over to someone and saying, "Did you actually approve this?" Calling them, in some way, communicating, yelling across the room. Did you actually want me to send this wire transfer or send these W-2s? And do it in a way other than email. Because if that email is compromised, then that's not going to do any good. So you need to have another mechanism to do it. No matter what your organization is, you're going to have phones available. Pick up the phone, just do that quick call, and put it in an environment where somebody who's lower in the organization is not afraid to contact the head of the organization to confirm something, or they're not afraid to contact the CFO to make sure that a transfer was actually requested.
Jim, could I interject here just a second, because someone had a question. They talked about that they're a smaller, they said, I told the story about a friend of mine, and they said, what size organization was that nonprofit? Well, it was about $10 million. And they said they were a smaller nonprofit, just like about $1 million. And I just wanted to, first, my friend was at the nonprofit, set up the protocol that if they got an email asking for a wire transfer, they had to call and verify it by over the phone. But that there had to be a call. They couldn't do it just on email request. And that was one of the changes they made. But a couple of things, even for small organizations, I mean, I just want to relay something. You think about some of these as being, you see the movies and they're very high tech and it's all, these huge computers and, it seems also incredibly sophisticated. But 3 incidents that we had to deal with nonprofits, one was a stolen laptop. Someone stole the laptop. They got into the passwords because they were stored on the laptop. One was a case where the nonprofit kept their checks in a safe, and the person who was responsible for cutting the checks thought it was a pain in the neck to open the safe every day, every time they needed a check. So she kept it open during the day, and it was one of those instances where everybody went to lunch at the same time, and a temporary employee came in and copied the information, the account number off the checks, and started doing stuff online. And then the third one was, and this seems so primitive, but it's true, someone just threw records away in the trash, and didn't shred them before they, and someone went through the trash, someone who was cleaning or something went through the trash, got the records, and the bank statements or whatever it was, or credit card statements, and because they weren't shredded. And sometimes the change is nothing more than buying a shredder, and it's just one of those things where, some of the incidents that people called us and asked us to help them with have involved pretty low-tech stuff, but once the information's out there, then people can make use of it. So I just wanted to add that to what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely, great points. So those are key things, particularly I think with disposal. I mean, dumpster diving still works, and it is still a very easy way to get a lot of information. And sometimes organizations too will dispose of information unknowingly. And one of my favorite security breaches that happened involved the Boston Globe newspaper, where someone was trying to save paper and be environmentally conscious, and so they had these large reams of tractor feed paper, which you don't see too much anymore, but they were using it to wrap the piles of newspapers that were going out in the morning. And then it turns out in this case they were using tractor feed of information on subscribers. And so it had subscribers' payment information all over these papers that were being used to bundle the newspapers. And they went out one morning and somebody realized it, and so they were sending trucks all over Boston one day to try and reclaim this, to get this information back, and it ended up being a big problem. So sometimes you try and do something good, and something bad like that can happen from it. So just think about it, be aware of how the information is leaving the organization.
And dumpster diving is still, Jim, I mean, that's right on. I mean, we've seen it where the criminals know, and they know, like smaller insurance companies or tax preparers, and they can lurk in the background. And a common mistake, I mean, innocent is just these companies throwing things out, and they leave for the day, and the criminals go in trying to see if there's anything, a social security number in there. So it's almost, they're kind of casing places, hoping that someone makes an innocent mistake. And there have been situations where even reporters will go in to try to get a story. I've seen this many years ago, where they were looking in dumpsters to see if the insurance company or the tax preparer properly disposed of things, and then it hits the media, and it can cause a lot of problems. So those non-technical, Regina, as you mentioned, are still very much in play today.
Yeah, very good. And I know we're running low on time. Beth and I have included several slides in here with links to useful information, a lot of it from the IRS, or from other agencies such as the FTC, on particular steps that can be taken to help prevent W-2 fraud or BEC more generally. We're not going to go through these on the call today, but they're in the slide materials. A lot of good stuff to look at there. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Regina, and let me know if we have any questions.
Yeah, Beth, Jim, first off, thank you very much. Two things. The first one, we had some question about what do cyber policies cover. You know, you hear about the consumer policies, or I don't know if they're policies, but consumer services like LifeLock and stuff like that, where they talk about, and they cover the cost of like attorney's fees and stuff like that. The commercial cyber policies, do they I assume they cover those types of expenses, but do they actually cover the cash loss as well? So that if you inadvertently, well, this is the question, I mistakenly send something or do something, and $10,000 goes out the door. Does the policy cover the actual cash loss, or just the cost of investigation and fixing things up?
I think the answer, unfortunately, it varies a lot. And so in the three cases I cited to, they all involved wire fraud, and the insured claimed that the policy should cover those actual losses in addition to the investigation costs, remediation costs, and so forth. But even on those remediation costs, there can be wide variation on what is covered. Some will cover your attorney fees, some will not. Some will cover attorney fees, but only to consultant fees, forensic fees, only to a particular amount, and it's your responsibility beyond that. They may only pay for it if they can use particular providers for it. So you'll have like an in-network and out-of-network kind of thing. So I think that you'll find significant variation among these. If you're shopping for it, to the extent possible, make out a list of the factors that you want to be covered, and specifically ask how those are covered into the policy, going in. Just because when you read three of these policies, they're all going to read in a very, very different way, and what they cover may vary, very significantly. I think we're starting to get to a point where the industry might be kind of coalescing around some common terminology in the policies, but we're nowhere near that point yet.
Okay, I know we're a little bit past one, so I'll just respond to one question myself, which is someone said, what do you do if you find you've been a victim? Well, one of the things you can do is, as other nonprofits have done, is contact us at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center, and we can match you with pro bono counsel who will help you deal with some of if you have notification requirements. Sometimes there may be patient information or something else under HIPAA or whatever. If you have notification requirements, or if you have a donor information breach, because that's one of the biggest things that nonprofits have and can be stolen once people get into your system. If you have one of those incidences, the council will help you figure out who you have to notify, what steps you have to take, whatever is needed. And so just give us contact us, and we can help find someone, legal counsel, to help you, guide you through whatever your legal obligations are with respect to the breach. And if you're having an issue with your insurance carrier about coverage, then we can help you there as well. So that's it. We've run out of time. So Jim, Beth, thank you so much again. We appreciate you taking the time to help us with this. And everybody have a great weekend.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.